Welcome to Y'all Woked Up University, your masterclass professor of wokeism, Kevin McGarry here. So let's talk about a subject that is near and dear to all of our hearts. Actually, it's near and dear to me because I just wrote a book about it called Woked Up, Finally Putting an Axe to the Taproot of White Supremacy and Racism. Yeah, that's what we want to talk about, white supremacy and racism. So here's the deal. We're 2 months out from two and a half, maybe 3 months out from a major election. And like clockwork, we have people who are consultants who come out and castigate an entire group of people simply because they happen to belong to a different political party and happen to dissent from the sort of Democrat, progressive, Marxist, sort of trajectory. So people on the other side of that now are being castigated, roundly castigated, as white supremacists and racists. James Carville, interesting character. He actually reminds me of a cartoon character. His facial structure is really interesting. Anyway, I digress. But here's the deal. James Carville came out just recently and said, look, if you're a Republican, if you're a conservative, if you're an evangelical, whatever, you're all white supremacists and racists. Now, why do they do this? They are playing with the minds of us who are just good people trying to figure it out and trying to hold fast to whatever is right. But they have a tendency to put these tropes out there and overlay and caricature an entire group of people. And unfortunately, this tendency to overlay these sort of disparaging tropes on people tends to work. That's why they do it. We want to be woke up this time. We want to be awakened. We want to be fully aware of what's happening. And what they're trying to do is to try to overlay this disparaging, horrible caricature on a group of dissenting voices who are just not progressive, ideologically Marxist or Democrat. And so here's the deal. We want to be able to bring some semblance of where does this all start and end? What's really true about white supremacy and racism? Since I wrote a book about it, I think that I'm actually the person that sort of brings some light to this. Today, we want to explore who was the author of white supremacy in its modern day context? Where did it start? When did it start? How did it start? And was this person also racist? And did this person actually have good intentions? Okay, let's start. Here's the deal. Johann Friedrich Blumenbach in 1770 actually started by classifying races. And his classification of races was primarily based on continents. 5 primary continents that were heavily populated at the time. He decided to start with those. So he started with, okay, the Caucasian race were primarily those from Europe. The Mongolian race were primarily those from Asia. The Ethiopian race were primarily those from all of your African and sub-Saharan populations there. The American race was primarily of indigenous people, Native Americans. This is what he kind of did, and classifying races. Came up with 5 different classifications based on geography. This person was in the exact same discipline and domain as who would come along later, 50 years later or so, Charles Robert Darwin. Darwin came around and he realized that Blumenbach had already done some profound work on races. But for Darwin, it wasn't enough to classify races based on geography. He felt that it needed a further classification based upon skin color. His work primarily focused around skin color. And in Darwin's work, even though Blumenbach, one of his one of his concluding assertions was blacks had no cognitive or intellectual deficiencies compared to any other ethnicity, any other race classification that he had already studied. Darwin came around 50 years later and said, no, blacks can and should be classified differently. You see, Darwin had a little bit of an issue. The issue was this. His cousin, who just so happened to be Thomas Malthus, he was a radical, paranoid environmentalist, if you can believe this. He basically believed that the world had limited resources, scarcity of resources, and we had all these other ethnicities that are overpopulating over and above sort of the pure Aryan, white, Caucasian race. Therefore, he whispered in his younger cousin Darwin's ear, hey, listen, when you do this natural selection, origin of species, this stuff, you got to make sure you show in your evolutionary cycle that there are some differences between these races, some distinctions. Darwin then went full on with his older cousin's admonition. He said, you know what, we're going to classify blacks as sort of lower on the evolutionary scale. It actually demonstrates that blacks are still kind of subhuman, gorillas, apes, and savages. This is in Darwin's work. So Darwin was the first to classify and basically give scientific justification to white supremacy, because in that same instance, he says, look, whites are Caucasian, Aryan, pure Aryan races are more intellectual or more profound and have a superior, if you will, genetic state compared to all other ethnicities. So Darwin was the one who actually, because he was so well known, highly heralded, listened to, done some profound work on plants and evolutionary cycles with other types of life, plant life and other, that people listened to him when he came up with these conclusions, these theories about human evolution. And so Darwin was the one who actually cemented white supremacy as being the ideal ethnic makeup, and blacks being subhuman and not ideal because they're lower in the evolutionary scale. Again, he equated blacks with gorillas, apes, and savages, and definitely subhuman. This is where we get white supremacy and racism today. It's infused throughout Darwin's work. Oh, by the way, Darwin didn't stop there. Darwin decided that, based on his work with looking at, cranial cavities, he decided that actually women, because they had a much smaller cranial cavity, they obviously had to have much less intellectual capacity. Darwin decided that women can and should be relegated because they are not quite up to snuff compared to men. So you women who want to figure out where sexism and misogyny in its modern day context came from, Darwin. You want to figure out where white supremacy and racism comes from, Darwin. You want to figure out how to answer people like James Carville and these other people who herald and esteem and love and embrace Darwinism and Marxism. The way you address them is, look, these are racist, white supremacist theories. And if you are truly not a racist or white supremacist, you will denounce publicly and renounce Darwinism and Marxism. Now, will you, Mr. Carville, do that? I can assure you he will not. You, Mr. Professor, will you do that? I can assure you the majority of them will not. You in the Democrat Party, you Democrat Socialist, will you do that? I can assure you they will not. So if they adhere and embrace and hold on to Darwinistic theories born out of white supremacy and racism, who's actually the white supremacist and racist? Y'all woke up? Are you awakening? Are you seeing the plot against you? Are you seeing how men, feeble-minded men, manipulate language in order to try to get a particular outcome? Malign, deceive, and abuse the masses for their outcome. Let's get woke up. Let's understand what time it is. Let's hold these people who are coming out with all of these tropes and these maniacal plots against us. Let's hold them accountable to their words. So you newscasters, you political pundits, you professors, you consultants, all of you who want to spew this white supremacist, racist trope, call me. I challenge you. That, let's have that conversation. Either you denounce and renounce Darwin and Marxism, or guess what? We know then who the white supremacists and racists really are. I hope this session with Y'all Woked Up University was helpful. This is just the start. There's so much more we're going to uncover. So please subscribe, join us as we come against the real white supremacists and racists. By the way, go to Amazon, get it. It's all footnoted. Everything's there for you, chapter and verse, letters, private letters, everything that will help you to understand really what's going on. We hope to see you next time. All right.